It's easy to get stuck reaching for the same familiar fruits and vegetables, even when you know a colorful variety is key. Balance of Nature's fruits and veggie supplements don't replace fruits and vegetables, but it makes it easy to add more variety to what you already eat. With 31 ingredients that are whole fruits and vegetables, switching it up is easy because we've already taken care of the hard part. Go to balanceofnature.com and get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first set as a new preferred customer by using discount code POD.
The left versus the right.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
It's the left versus the right. Debate. Heavyweight slugfest.
And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another stunning edition of The Left versus the Right. I'm David Paterson, and I'm here with James Flippin, as I've been a number of times. He is my favorite guest. I don't care if the other guests hear about it. And we have got a lot to do today, Mr. Flippin. And what I've decided to do is, because I think that we've moved into the stage where people need some type of remedial help. So I'm a doctor. I don't know if you knew that. I'm a doctor in the sense that I went to law school and I have a Juris Doctorate.
It's JD, yes, a jurisprudence doctorate, yes.
And so, but most lawyers never call themselves doctors.
That is true.
There was one stunning example of the opposite. A former borough president of the Bronx, and he ran for mayor a few times, Herman Badillo, insisted on being called doctor. And so he's not around anymore, so we don't have to call him doctor anymore. But let's start with this. And I think you should lead right here.
Okay.
What happened on Tuesday? I don't get it. I mean, not just in New York, but New Jersey, even bordering into some of the southern states. Ideas being approved by states in California and Illinois, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It can't just be all one reason. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, Governor Paterson, great to be with you, and definitely would say that there's a lot of different factors at play when it comes to what we saw on Election Day. And I think they all deserve spending time on individually and looking at on an individual level. So, for example, let's go down to Virginia. I don't think that Winsome Earl Sears was a great candidate. And I think that the fact that she attempted to distance herself from President Trump when the ascendant political movement on the right is, in fact, MAGA, it goes to show you that that's really a losing hand in a way in Virginia. With all the federal workers in the northern part of the state, the demographics continue to shift in the direction of that being a solidly blue state, not the swing state that it sort of once was. And that's bizarre, I guess, when you think about the southern portion of the state, especially the southwestern portion of the state, which is much more rural, redneck, if you want to use that term, which some people would. I don't know if that one's offensive or not, but I guess I can say it. And then at the same time, you had the ability for a Spanberger to really kind of lean in on, all the problems with the government shutdown being caused by the Republicans are in power. People don't necessarily pay that close attention to that whole process to maybe understand that it's a lot more nuanced than that. And so that's going to break in the direction of
Spanberger's victory was a surprise to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I increasingly think that one of the problems is with certain states, let's call it Virginia, let's call it New Jersey for our purposes, they are pretty solidly blue. They are pretty solidly left. When you look at the registrations of voters, it really shouldn't be competitive most of the time. That said, if you have a really good candidate or other certain circumstances that are working in your favor, you could potentially break through. I don't think a Winsome Earl Sears and a Jack Ciattarelli rose to that level of really compelling candidates. And the other thing I'll mention, and I don't necessarily think we need to spend a whole lot of time on Governor Paterson because it's gotten broadcasters in trouble in the past. So, you kind of mention it with a little bit of trepidation. But there were some weird things that happened in New Jersey. Okay, when Governor Murphy won re-election in 2021, he did so with 1.3 million votes. That was the way that he got it done against Chitterelli, who was like at like 1.2 something or other.
Right.
And then this time around, Chitterelli actually got more votes than Murphy did in 2021, but Mikey Sherrill went up to 1.8 million, an increase of 35% in the vote total that was received by Murphy in 2021.
Yeah.
That's pretty strange. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. There's a lot of conservatives who say in 2020, there were some weird things that happened, things that never really fully got explained in terms of the voting tendencies. New Jersey kind of had some weird stuff going on there. That's all. That's all I'm going to say. And then I don't know if you want to respond to either of those or kind of get into the New York City and the California Prop 50 thing. But I would say in terms of the gubernatorial races, the race for governor in Virginia and New Jersey, the biggest factors, I think, were that the Republicans just didn't really have super compelling move the needle candidates. And that's kind of the only chance you have in these increasingly blue states.
Well, you know, I think I was a victim of believing everything I saw on television. So when the Chitterelli campaign, they had this situation where Mikey Sherrill was asked with a microphone right in front of her, how much money does she have? And she couldn't answer the question. Then, toward the end of the campaign, there was an interview with her and Marsha Kramer, and Marsha Kramer asked her what would be her priority on her first day. I think it took a minute, and she never got to her first day. And so I was sure that Chitterelli was going to win. And then for her to win, and I've got, you know, the only thing I could say, James, because that does sound a little suspicious, I'll admit, but the only thing I could say is the voting tendencies were up big for, this wasn't even an off year, this is an off year. Mm-hmm. This is the third year, I'm sorry, this was the,
non-presidential,
right? Non-presidential off year, and that may have brought out a lot of voters because there was a lot of conversation about these campaigns, and I think a lot of it stirred by the inevitable mayor-elect of New York, Mamdani,
right?
Because that race was not a city race; it wasn't a state race. It was kind of a barometer on where the whole country is right now. And it was, I guess, somewhat surprising to me. I endorsed Andrew Cuomo. I thought he would run the city properly. And then, you know, you had the disputes about what Curtis Sliwa should have done. And I won't get into it too much, but I thought his conduct, particularly in the last month of the campaign, was disrespectful of a lot of people who've stood up for him for years. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. I mean, I would like, if you're okay with it, I would like to get into that. I think that it's definitely a worthwhile discussion. The Sliwa stuff is obviously germane to the discussion at hand, but also the radio station. We have to definitely acknowledge that. I think it's worth getting into. But just to kind of quickly touch back on the races,
sure,
and the way it all broke out. Yeah, I've heard from some people, right? Some people have suggested that the ongoing immigration and deportation efforts are causing some problems for conservatives with like Hispanic voters, maybe. You had gains that President Trump had made in like Passaic County, New Jersey, that potentially went away this time around. There's also this whole argument that there's a lot more Republican-leaning voters moving out of a place like New Jersey in favor of Florida, in favor of the Carolinas. Right. We know that trend has been happening. I'll just say this. If the Republicans had lost in New Jersey because the vote totals were depressed on the GOP side, then I'd say, well, then that's an explanation.
But as you just pointed out a few minutes ago,
she went up.
Chitterelli
he gained.
Went up to 1.2.
He went up to 1.3 something. He actually got more votes than what Murphy got in 2021.
Right. He would have beaten Murphy in 21 if he got those votes.
Correct. But Sherrill went all the way up to 1.8.
She went to 1.8.
Getting a 35% increase in vote totals.
I don't know how that happens. I'm not casting any aspersions.
It's really strange, isn't it?
What?
I don't know how to answer that either. Huh. Anyway.
I can't answer it.
No, I can't answer it. But then I just want to say, as far as Sliwa, because I'd love for you to expand on your thoughts more, I think that there's a lot of people who share your views, right? There's a lot of people who are mad with Curtis, feel as though he didn't do the right thing, I guess, by maybe pulling out of the race entirely or doing something, trying to form a coalition with Cuomo, a unity ticket or whatever they call that. I just don't understand why it would be the duty of the Republican to do that when you had two Democrats that were duking it out for mayor. In other words, I don't know why a Republican who's trying to push forth on the principles that the right is supposed to espouse is going to then say, well, I guess I can squint and see where Cuomo's better than Mamdani. Although I know what Cuomo did as governor for a significant amount of time. I don't agree with that as a Republican. So I don't know. I don't really like him. I guess I don't like Mamdani either. Hold my nose, try to pick. Can you give me some more feedback on how you're looking at it and why specifically you think Sliwa's behavior was
the way I've been looking at it for the past couple of months is I've never thought that candidates, particularly, they start when it's cold, like February.
Right.
And they go around all these places. The whole summer, they're away from their families. They're literally crawling to Election Day. And then somebody walks by while they're crawling and says, oh, get up and get out of the race. And I didn't think it was fair for, at times, it seemed to be an ultimatum to Curtis.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that. And I didn't have a problem with the fact that he stayed in. But where I thought there was a problem was he was exacting vengeance on the people who were attacking him, when if I were him, I would have just said, well, look, I have a right to run. I'm going to exercise that right. I hear the objection. I'm still going to exercise my right to finish the race. So I wasn't particularly angry at the fact that he finished the race. I was angry that he didn't seem to have anything but acrimony for people who laid out why he would leave the race. And I always thought, and said even here last week, I'll bet you if you add Sliwa's vote to Cuomo's, that it still won't beat Mamdani. And that's what happened.
The math backs that up.
Yeah, but I just think that...
And not all those voters were going to vote for Cuomo anyway.
It's amazing, James. People thought it was... I don't know what the board game was you could play where you could give your chips to someone else.
Yeah.
You can't do that because many of your voters voted for you. They wouldn't think of voting for Andrew Cuomo or Zohran Mamdani.
Right, exactly.
And that's where I thought people went... I mean...
Well, you look at politics, I think, with a different perspective than most people because you've actually been involved in it from a principal actor perspective, as opposed to just looking at it and saying, oh, cool, like, in this is overly simplistic, but a baseball fan that isn't really much of a baseball fan might say, I don't understand. Why aren't they just hitting home runs every time?
Exactly.
All you have to do is hit a bunch of home runs and you're going to win the game. It's simple. That
is a very good assessment of how people are. Now, we're on the left versus the right. We are trying to be serious around here, but there is a little entertainment value I want to share with you.
Please do.
And it has to do with the fact that, as you know, Curtis pays for the support of his son, who's disabled, Anthony, who works right here at WABC. And I think all of us love him. And the money has to obviously go through the parents. And so I was sitting in John's office about a month ago. I'll remember this for the rest of my life, James.
Okay.
And somebody calls up. And what John does sometimes is he hits the speaker when someone's talking to him. And I hear this, come on, John, get him out of there. Get him out of there. He says, no, I can't do that. He goes, you can't do it. Double his salary. And John said, if I double his salary, most of the money will go to David. Man. I just thought, every campaign, this kind of a moment I remember, I'm going to remember that one for a few years.
Well, so that's interesting. Like, you have a unique history with Curtis Sliwa, who you he refers to you as his husband-in-law.
Yes.
And, having worked with him in the past, radio and obviously just being out there, politics and stuff, you know him on that level, and you can't necessarily speak to all this stuff that's going out there. But people are saying, oh, he stayed in this or he got in this for the money, and he just wants to be in this for the money and the campaign funds that he can somehow convert to living expenses or whatever. And then there's other people who I think you've already said in this particular show, you're more objecting to maybe his lack of grace, lack of gratitude, lack of political savvy in the way he responded to some of that opposition to his campaign, right? I mean, it's sort of more the secondary thing in what you're saying, right? Like you feel as though he didn't show a level of maybe maturity or professionalism regarding the fact that obviously politics gets sticky and some people are going to say, you must do this now, even if you don't agree.
You hit it right on the head. I was looking to get into radio for a long time, and I had my first offer was in 2013, and it was on one of the lesser listened to stations.
Yeah, right.
But Curtis was working there from 5 to 7, and they said, we want you to do the show with Curtis. I said, why don't I do the show from the World Trade Center and then jump off the building? And
this was before you knew him, really.
I really didn't know him at all.
Yeah.
We started doing the show, and I think that both of us found out that we had a connection. There was a way that we communicated that was similar.
Yeah.
Where he's 2 months older than me. So we're really exactly the same age. So we watched the same cartoons.
Yeah, right.
We would bring things up from, TV shows. References. And it would excite the audience, who for the most part was our age.
Right. You guys were talking soupy sales and getting fired up. And
exactly. And the pie in his face, that kind of thing. So Curtis had a little saying. He said, Governor Paterson doesn't ride the subways like me. He has a limousine, and Jeeves, the driver, drives him down here every day. We were like somewhere in the 50s. And he says, and when the show's over, Jeeves drives him home. I've got to go in the subway, and I've got to go fight crime, blah, blah, blah. So one morning, I get a phone call from a friend of mine. He said, look, this company would like to meet with you. They thought you might be a good consultant for them as they move forward, and they want to have dinner with you. And so, are you available? I said, yeah, okay, I'll be there. They said, would you like them to send you a limousine, or would you come yourself? Well, James, most of my life, I didn't accept
rides like
rides where the people were implying I couldn't get there by myself.
Right.
So I made my usual statement. I said, no, I'm fine. I'll get to... You know what? I said, send the limousine over. So it's 5 to 7. I said, Curtis, I got something to do. Cover me. He goes, okay. I go outside, and I had a little transistor radio with the earphone, and as soon as I get near the car, goes, there, I knew it. I told you all. He gets up. He takes a picture of me getting in the limousine. It goes viral. The picture of this. What it did for the station was great.
That's awesome.
But the point is that on a certain level, I kind of know him because I know how he grew up and that sort of thing.
Sure.
And my disappointment with him was candidate up or mayor up. You want to be the mayor? Act like a mayor. And just say, listen, I understand what a lot of you are saying. On some level, it makes some sense, but it doesn't make sense to me. And since I've come this far, I hope you won't mind if I go to the finish. That's what got on my nerves.
Do you think, and this is a sort of nuanced thing, but maybe we'll get it on the other side of the break. I feel as though there's a lot of unique perspectives involved in all this because so many of the people that we're talking about aren't true Republicans, aren't true Democrats, maybe aren't as far left as the Democrat Party is nowadays, aren't as far right as some people in the Republican Party. What I'm talking about is people like Sid Rosenberg, Greg Kelly, Dominic Carter, even Curtis Sliwa himself. I can explain more when we get to the other side of the break, but I feel as though people's politics are a lot more nuanced than people think.
I have a guest that can stop talking before the break comes. So we will be back with Mr. Timing. James Flippin and I'm David Paterson here on The Left versus the Right, here on WABC 77 on your radio dial.
It's the left versus the right.
The Left versus the Right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Left versus the Right.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
It's the left versus the right. Debate. Heavyweight slugfest.
We're back on The Left versus the Right. And when we left off, James Flippin, my frequent guest and guest today, raised an issue that I've been thinking about but haven't been able to articulate it, and that is who's really a Republican and who's really a Democrat these days. You have the lines are blurred a little bit.
Sure.
And even with President Trump, he blurred the lines, and I'm not criticizing him. Mm-hmm. He said, I'd rather work with a Democrat than a communist.
Right.
So he meant, look, if you're with me, please don't let Mamdani win. Vote for Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah.
You know, now there was nothing wrong with what he did, but then people start to get confused, like, well, you know, I would like to vote for Andrew Cuomo, but Trump is right, it's that kind of confusion.
It's a very strange political atmosphere, you're right, because in the sense that, and there were some people who even took to X, I think it was formerly Twitter, David Hogg, who was involved in that terrible shooting on Valentine's Day at the Parkland High School and then got involved in the DNC. He was recounting stories of people at polling sites basically saying, oh, I was going to vote for Cuomo, but not anymore, not with Trump having. And, some of that could be a little more antagonistic, trying to get motion on Twitter and
right.
knowing that that's going to kick up the masses and get some impressions and all that. That's definitely something. But as far as what I was saying before the break, I just think it's unique in this sense. A lot of people, myself included, wanted to see the Republican take it to the finish line as Curtis Sliwa in this case, because it's important for future elections. In other words, I'm a Republican. I've always been a Republican. I believe strongly in right-of-center political principles, private property rights, enforcing violent crime, upward mobility through innovation and hard work and all that kind of stuff. That's states' rights, if you want to get into the national side. That's something I feel strongly about. But Curtis Sliwa is not really, truly one of the most dyed-in-the-wool Republicans that you could ever find in the world. He's always been, I think, a lot more centrist on some issues, independent on others. Definitely right of center when it comes to like immigration, but on some other things, not so much. And definitely not a Trump ally. That kind of was more apparent throughout the campaign season than maybe some people realized previously. So he wasn't necessarily the guy to make that case that I think you're talking about. One where somebody could say, look, I know the numbers are bad right now. I understand that this may be, in some people's mind, a pointless effort, a sacrificial lamb, whatever it may be. But it's important to the future of the GOP that I continue to stand strong and represent these principles that are divergent from what Cuomo stands for, divergent from what Mamdani stands for. And that's something that I'm going to continue to do for the voters and for the supporters that I count dear. But I think you're right in that there wasn't necessarily enough of that towards the bottom line and towards the end. And maybe because Curtis kind of felt like he still had a chance, I don't know. He was remaining defiant, fighting against Cuomo, fighting against Mamdani, and fighting against some of his former allies in that respect.
Well, Mayor Flippin, I think that would have been really the pathway for a Republican that had the resources, that had some, I would just say, greater standing than Curtis. Not that Curtis hasn't tried to do things.
Sure, but he's definitely not like a political figure as much as he's a figure and a well-known person.
Like not a congressman, or somebody that really has grappled with a lot of the city issues before and would be a Republican and was willing to go all the way. And Curtis went all the way in 2021 and he got wiped out 72 to 28 by Eric Adams. So he was kind of the sacrificial candidate there. But he gave it his best. I was just thinking that he would have diverted the criticism to issue spotting.
Right.
Like, listen, you're telling me that I shouldn't be able to finish the race when my opponent, Mr. Mamdani, doesn't finish anything till he starts.
Right.
Something like that.
Sure.
Something to give Republicans, even if they lost, a feeling that their standard bearer was really going for it.
And I think that's fair. I think that if nothing else, the criticism that you could wage against Sliwa, and he probably wouldn't even fight against it if he was sitting right here, is that he's not really a politician. The guy's a pugilist. The guy's tough. The guy is willing to put his money where his mouth is in terms of how he feels and all that kind of thing. But in terms of the skill that it takes to be like a politician and kind of some of the games you almost have to play, right? I feel like I've heard you really make really interesting insights about some of that stuff. Like, well, I know if I'm not friends with this one right now, then I won't be friends with them 6 months from now. And, if I say this to this person here, I could probably say something mean to them the next time. That is a little bit more like the chess game that goes into playing some of that stuff. And you have to be almost a different level of personality to properly pull that off, I think.
Yeah. And what I'll say is that, working here at WABC myself, I was kind of shocked at how vengeful he was toward Sid Rosenberg and Greg Kelly and Dominic Carter and other people. I noticed it was a name that he left out, but but I just thought those are the conversations you have in a room with someone one-to-one, and hopefully you shout at each other. Then you shake hands and you come out. He didn't give them a chance.
Yeah, I mean, look, and that's to connect to the secondary part of what I was saying before. That's where I think that some of the way that maybe Curtis responded or felt a little bit emotionally was almost kind of potentially off base. And this is why. Sid Rosenberg has been very open and honest about the fact that he voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Okay? This is not some guy who for the entirety of his adult life has been a firmly right of center. That's the only politics I want to hear. All this. Greg Kelly even has been open and said, there was times when I kind of was more this type of Republican versus this, being more interested in the Democrats. And, I am a MAGA guy. That's what Greg Kelly has said. Dominic Carter, again, he tries to play it as best you can with a right of center bend on the more like journalistic, these are my observations from years as a news guy, this is what I've got for you. So to make it super personal from a Curtis perspective just doesn't really make a lot of sense because he's been on the radio forever. You got to fill a lot of time. You got to have content. You got to talk about what's going on. And they are going to do what they think is best for the place they live and the place that they care about, just like Curtis is going to do the same thing. So I don't know. It's also such a weird circumstance in the sense that Curtis eventually you think is going to come back to the radio, whether it's here or somewhere else. And he wants to have those narratives and those stories and those kind of drama points to be able to carry forward that whole thing. So some of that could be a manufacturing of his showman, mindset and a little bit like, when I have my comeback to the so-called airwaves, I'm going to be known as a guy who has a lot of axe to grind with not just the political process, but even people that are in my industry. And that gives them an angle in that respect.
Now, this has been, kind of on my mind and the minds of people here. And, there's a little more inside baseball here.
Yeah.
Let's get to the man who did win the mayor's race. The man who right after winning the mayor's race goes to
Puerto Rico.
But even before he did that, he went to a Democratic Socialist conference And he started talking about things he's going to do that he didn't actually even talk about in the campaign, because I don't think, I think he knew if he talked about it in the campaign, the election might have been a lot closer. And, but I have a theory about him, and I want to try it out on you. My theory is that he's the Manchurian candidate, that he's actually being controlled by other people. And unlike a Manchurian candidate, they've stepped forward and identified themselves. Kind of like when Tom Homan, when they asked him, what will you do if Mayor Adams doesn't cooperate with you? And he said, I'm going to kick his butt. Well, he came right out and said it. These people are like him. They are like, he better do what we said to do. And my theory, you know, everyone always says socialism never worked anywhere. This is no exception. My feeling is Mamdani can't do enough. Socialists are like people who are on drugs. They've got to have a hit every day. And if they don't get one, they start to go into, you know, some kind of a literal physical response. And at some point, they're going to say to Mamdani, you know what? When you shut down these charter schools, you really should have shut down some of the public schools. And he says, well, you know, we have to have the kids go somewhere. No, but you see, they're not getting the right education. We know how to educate them. And we've got a bunch of people we need you to hire as teachers. And Mamdani probably goes along with it. But there's a part of him, I think, that at one point might just say something slightly different, and then they will destroy him. So
you're talking about the DSA.
Yes.
And the fact that that organization is in many ways the power center behind the Mamdani campaign, right? He's a Democratic socialist. He secured the Democratic Party nomination, but he's really truly of the DSA, and they've got some pretty radical positions on you know, things tied to Israel, and obviously, like you alluded to, this the socialist agenda that they want to kind of put into place.
Well, the agenda that they wrote, that I got to see
a couple
of days ago, it was discontinue any law enforcement training with Israel. Right. Discontinue student exchange programs with Israel. Why didn't they just write discontinue Israel?
Yeah.
You know. And,
well, I mean, that's sort of they're probably into that, the boycott, divest, and sanction.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big thing for the DSA. Yeah, well, look, I find it very interesting that that's the reality we are in right now. You know, this DSA, which has sort of been lurking in the shadows as a major political force in New York City, but there's probably not that many people that firmly know what they're all about or kind of what it is and
even how many of them there are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know that when we had the October 7th attacks, it was like that day or maybe the next day, there was some Democrat Socialist of America rally in Times Square, I think it was, that was more or less of a pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, you know, just the bodies weren't even cold yet in southern Israel, and they were doing this rally. So there's some pretty radical stuff there, and for sure, Zohran Mamdani counts himself as a member of that group. I don't know. I think that it'll be fascinating to see, for example, if a guy like Mamdani is just a true believer, captured candidate, guy who's got all these people pulling his strings, or if he kind of used some of that to potentially get into office, and if he's going to move to the center. Now, I don't know how likely that is in this day and age. Maybe it's wishful thinking. Maybe it's naive to think that he even could happen. I know that so many people still in the political game like to lift up a guy like Bill Clinton as somebody who was such a success because they found their spots where he could come to the middle and try to build a coalition and lead the entirety of the group. I find it hard to believe that that is what Mamdani's going to do. I hope so. I think that the speech he gave on Victory Night led you to believe that he's really more of the now's the time for vengeance, now's the time for we're going to get ours, now's the time for you'll be sorry type thing. And that kind of lends itself more to what you're talking about. But I don't know. I mean, what do you think do you think that, for example, because this is something I know Greg Kelly was talking about earlier this week, and I was listening to him on the station, saying he thinks that Mamdani will be able to pull off a lot of the stuff he's talked about. Free buses, rent freeze with the stabilized apartments. I don't know if I agree with that. You know, in essence, the MTA is not just going to say, oh, yeah, sure, no problem, go ahead. There's been some clash at times, I think, between like what the MTA wants to do and what city leadership wants to do. They tend to be in lockstep a lot of the time.
Right.
But I think there could be some disagreement there. And then you have the thing with what's going to happen with the NYPD and training. I mean, we'll see. Is Jessica Tisch going to step down right away? Is she going to sort of represent a bulkhead there? I don't know. But you're firmly convinced that that's really full steam ahead for Mamdani at this point with that DSA agenda, huh?
In one of the debates, Mamdani was talking about a Jewish woman that he met. Mm-hmm. And she said, oh, my daughter's this big supporter of you. And but I got to be honest, I'm not. And he was telling this woman how he's going to make sure that Jewish citizens in the city are protected. And he went through a couple of things. And if you didn't know who it was, it's something that a Republican might have said. Mm-hmm. It's something that a Democrat might have said. But it always seemed to me that whenever he kind of tried to open up his heart as a human being and talk about how he deals with other human beings, the problem is maybe he has a little heart, but they are like driven, you know, almost like terrorists. And I'm not accusing any of them of using any violence. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying having this mindset that it's about destroying the other people,
right,
or taking other people down. It's not enough that we got Andrew Cuomo. Now let's get Hochul out of there, even though she endorsed Mamdani. A lot of them would like to have a candidate considered to be more left than Hochul and go forward. So we'll take that up in just a second. But we are here on WABC, the left versus the right, and we do have sponsors. And if I don't let the sponsors speak, this is the last time you'll see David Paterson or hear David Paterson on the left versus the right. We'll be back right after
this. In that case, we better go.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's the left versus the right.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The left versus the right.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
It's the left versus the right. Debate. Heavyweight slugfest.
And we're back with the left versus the right. And what we've been learning through the first 44 minutes of this show is that both the left and the right are maybe confused after these elections that we experienced earlier in the week, and are maybe looking for a real leader to step up and give direction. Kind of like President Trump, even though President Trump himself was so involved in, you know, how it was going to turn out in New York City, and you know, that he doesn't want to work with a communist.
Right. My little communist, as he called.
My little communist. Well, he's got a big communist named Vladimir Putin, and I think he's the one he should be focusing on.
Yeah.
And but still, you know, in a way, it was a little refreshing to have a president talk about a mayor's race. I'll bet that never happens again.
Probably not, yeah. And I mean, look, obviously Trump's got a strong affinity for her and a really big connection to New York, and he always will. And that goes without saying. But of course, with the immigration enforcement agenda, New York, Chicago, LA, they've all been closely caught up in all that. And some of that, the relation between the mayor at hand and the presidential administration. So also, it is kind of a good thing to have a president talking about domestic affairs when some of the criticisms from Republicans following this blue wave, if you want to call it that, on election day, is that President Trump has spent too much time thinking about international affairs, and that it's been too much with the negotiated ceasefire between Israel and Palestine, and that all the focus is on Ukraine and Russia, and that maybe Trump does see that as an important thing for his legacy or for what he can accomplish. But meanwhile, there's a lot of American voters who are going to say, well, what about us? Aren't you doing anything back here? What about this shutdown? What are you doing to get that negotiated or get that ended and whatever? So the fact is that I had a conversation with Anthony Weiner on election night because he was here participating in programming.
And you're admitting to it publicly?
Well, we did do this show together for a while, so I mean, I guess I have to admit that.
You sure did.
Yeah, he's got the little goatee now. I said, well, you're like Bizarro World, Anthony Weiner, with the goatee there. But he was saying that, when he has conversations with people he knows in the DSA, he feels as though, yes, like any organization, there are the true believers within that organization. But other than that, if you can make peace with them on certain issues, and if you can really kind of make it work for them in terms of the agenda that they want to achieve, like anything else, they're not going to hold somebody's feet to their fire entirely. I guess there is some agreement maybe that the idea of keeping a Jessica Tisch in place at the NYPD is not a cardinal sin. There's been reporting out there that that's actually not the perspective of the DSA. That I don't really know. I do not have any inside knowledge on that. But in terms of what is or isn't going to drive the agenda for Mamdani and his mayoralty, I have to say there's a lot about what's played out with the race for mayor and just the way the political game has been in New York for the last 6 months that doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, I spent years covering press conferences down at City Hall with the city council, and I would go to these protests around town that would be held in response to various events. And yes, that's a microcosm of the population in the city, but a small percentage of the city actually participates in these elections. So the really inflamed, passionate political position in New York is socialist, is Marxist, and does believe that the means of production perhaps ought be seized in order to better benefit the rank and file of the city and all this kind of stuff. And we have to accept that. We have to say, okay, if that's the case, then we have to make a case on the other side for why private property rights are important, why capitalism is important, how people's standard of living over the course of human history has been lifted up through that process. And if you can't make that case, you're never going to beat socialism.
And it's interesting because it demonstrates how politics is cylindrical, in that the left has becoming more left and the Democratic Party more and more and more, so much that they're starting to support some issues that would be acceptable on the right. And by the way, speaking of the right, let's talk a little bit about the sort of feud that's going on. Tucker Carlson's interview with
Nick Fuentes.
Right, who is a Holocaust denier, people coming to Carlson's defense, people trashing him, and I've seen this on the other side, where it inevitably hurts the major party, which would be the Republican Party.
Right.
But these people seem pretty... they are just very focused, and it's it's getting worse.
I think that there's a lot of interesting crossover behind what you're talking about, this sort of rift on the right, this infighting, and a lot of it does have to do with the issue of Israel and then some of the outcroppings of that.
Right.
It's very comparable in a way to what we've spent a lot of time talking about today, the mayor's race. And why do I say that? Because I think in life, and definitely in politics, but also just in life, one of the easiest things that you could do would be to come up with an excuse. It's one of the easiest things you can do in life is come up with an excuse. And people want an excuse. They gravitate towards an excuse. So with Curtis Sliwa, Oh, well, he's the reason that New York is so far left nowadays. He's the reason Marxism has taken over the... Well, not really.
Right.
Karl Marx wrote that manifesto in 1848. So Curtis is old, but he's not that old.
No.
And, in terms of Israel, and then you could argue whether it's just anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism or whatever. That gets a little messy and gray area. On both the left and on the right, you've got a lot of opposition to Israel. And I think some of that is people being frustrated with maybe their own economic lot in life, their position with whatever it may be, standing, status, influence. And that level of frustration and anger can kind of spill out into, I want to find an excuse. And so many times throughout life and throughout human history, we've seen that that's going to aim itself at either the poor, the sick, the really rich, the really powerful, maybe certain groups of people who are for various reasons connected to problems at hand, and then they get blamed for the entire situation. So, Jews are going to be made into a scapegoat and made into an excuse. And some of that is going to connect to Israel. And you've got the issue of how much money is spent on wars in the Middle East and how much of taxpayer money is spent on, let's say, Israel and the influence that an AIPAC has.
And how long will the public tolerate it?
Exactly. And so when you have it on the left, you have it on the right as well. And because we've talked about it, right? The left has been in many ways torn apart its own with the issue of Israel and, Jewish Democratic voters who don't agree with that. And then the more youthful members of the, say, Democratic Party who are bothered by the foreign spending and the influence of AIPAC in Congress and all. So that's where you talk about cylindrical. Some of both sides can meet a little bit. That really strong populist position that takes itself as an opposition to almost any foreign spending, but perhaps especially with regards to Israel. And then, of course, there's a lot of people who just are anti-Semitic, but then others who aren't can find sympathy in this concept of, wait a minute, America first, right? Don't spend all that taxpayer dollars over there. And why is AIPAC such an influential lobby? Why do so many members of Congress have dual citizenship with Israel? What's going on here? So that's a little bit of what's going on. And then what's interesting, Governor Paterson, is you also have fighting amongst conservatives who maybe don't have as strong a position on Israel, pro-Israel, whatever, but it becomes kind of one of the cancel culture discussions. Like, well, does Tucker Carlson even have a right to then have a platform if he's talking to this guy? Does Nick Fuentes have a right to a platform, period? How much do we want to be focused on silencing people versus lifting them up? And is it a free speech versus a something else issue? And that gets complicated, right? I mean, we've always been faced with things like that.
Right. And of course, the uncomplicating part of it is trying to remember the First Amendment and respecting other people's right to utilize their speech, their writing, their activities, and that kind of thing.
And the Heritage Foundation, even our own Steve Moore, I think here at the station, sorry not to cut you off, he resigned because the Heritage Foundation has taken a different position and said that we're okay with these free exchange of ideas and stuff. It gets kind of high level, and I don't know what the right answer is.
Wow. No more?
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
What are we going to do earlier on Saturday?
Yeah.
And so
he's still here. He just had something with the Heritage Foundation.
Oh, okay.
Leave it to them.
Well, this has been a rather intense show. We've gone through all the difficult situations, how they will play out after the election on November 4th.
Yeah.
I'm glad I remembered. I almost didn't remember to go to,
wait a second,
to vote.
Because the days are all running together.
I have a surprise for you.
Ooh.
I am going to make your day.
Really?
I understand from Vinny Badugno. Vinny Badugno told me in the last week that when John Sterling was starting to do his show a couple of weeks ago, and what preceded it was you and I mocking him, making fun of the Yankees, and expressing our absolute
joy at their having been bounced from the playoffs.
The Yankees bounced from the playoffs.
Right.
It has come to my attention that John Sterling liked what we did, actually laughed at it. And John Sterling years ago worked with my wife.
Okay.
And he placed a call to her very recently, and it came up on the call, and he enjoyed having this time of a little, humor in the midst of everything else. I'd like you to know that.
And I appreciate you telling me that story, Governor Paterson, because, we're both Mets fans.
Yes.
And definitely for me, I think you're probably a little too mature to consider yourself a Yankees hater, but I am not as mature as Governor Paterson, and I am a Yankees hater. So, but that being said, I love John Sterling. I've never actually, really gotten to know him on like a personal level, but it makes me think of 1996, being here in the city, in my friend's parents' back car. We had just gone to, I think it was like a Halloween thing. MSG used to, maybe they still do. They'd have like the Fright Fest thing. Or whatever. It was in the theater at MSG.
Right.
And so we'd gone to that, and we're leaving, we're driving home, and I'll remember as clear as yesterday, the foul out to Charlie Hayes in foul territory. The Yankees win the World Series, and it was obviously the iconic call of John Sterling. Yankees win. The Yankees win. And, again, it had such a different energy when they won in 96, because that was like the first time in a while that they'd done it. And I liked Don Mattingly, who had just left the team the year before. I always liked Don Mattingly, so I couldn't really hold it against them.
It's interesting how many Mets fans liked Yankee players.
Yeah, it was just different before 96, right? It was just so different. And then eventually, once they started to become the butt kickers again, it was like, all right, I'm a little tired of this. And then, of course, in 2000, it came at our expense. So it was like, well, now I'm really sick and tired of this. But anyway, we love John Sterling.
Now, by the way, James, one more thing.
Okay.
I have some breaking news.
Breaking news.
It's 24 hours old at this point.
Okay.
But some breaking news from yesterday.
Right.
President Trump has pardoned Darryl Strawberry.
Yes, that's right.
Yes,
I saw
Darryl Strawberry.
I saw that. And what a
president helping the straw man.
Yes. And I think
I love it.
In one of the newscasts I did yesterday, I was saying 2 1980s New York City celebrities coming together. Now President Trump pardoning Darryl Strawberry. Would you have believed that?
Absolutely.
In 1986, Governor Paterson? What if I could go back in time and Strawberry had just hit a bomb of a home run, and I said, did you know in 2025, President Donald Trump will pardon Darryl Strawberry for crimes?
And hitting the home run.
And scene. Yeah, exactly. So, no, I love Strawberry. I think that it's awesome the way that he turned his life around. You mentioned at the front end of your show the concept of lawyers wanting to be called doctors.
Yeah.
That's a little bit absurd. My beloved doctor is, of course, Dr. K. And we've said how we want the city to bounce back, and we hope for the best under Mamdani and stuff. I fell in love with New York as a young kid, taking my parents' car in, driving in the back seat out of the Lincoln Tunnel, the huge mural of Doc Gooden on the building there.
Oh, yeah.
And seeing the big buildings and thinking, whoa, this is what it's all about.
The two of them had such an impact on things.
100%.
And then they both went through very serious, episodes in their lives. And for President Trump to take the time out to pardon Strawberry in 2029. Well, let me think about
it. You're going to go into the future and tell us what's coming.
Yeah, James, as always, we always have a good time when you're on the left versus the right.
Yes. And let me just say, last thing before we go, Governor Paterson, that night when we were leaving the studio, election night, I was trying to cheer up Mr. Katsimatidis, and I said, we're going to get back. We're going to be okay. New York's going to come back. And you said you liked it. You said you were appreciating the optimism that night, right?
I did. I thought that was great. You have to get up the next morning, no matter what happens, and do your job. Thank you all for listening. I know who's listening right now, John Sterling. So, John, you can say something nice about how we treated you today, and have a good time on your show from 4 to 5. Then Vinny Meduno. We'll be back next week on WABC. Thanks for listening.
The Left versus the Right on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
It's easy to get stuck reaching for the same familiar fruits and vegetables, even when you know a colorful variety is key. Balance of Nature's fruits and veggie supplements don't replace fruits and vegetables, but it makes it easy to add more variety to what you already eat. With 31 ingredients that are whole fruits and vegetables, switching it up is easy because we've already taken care of the hard part. Go to balanceofnature.com and get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first set as a new preferred customer by using discount code POD.